You press record? Okay, so hi everyone, thank you for coming. It's great to see you here. Name is Kyle. This is my seminar titled The Nature of Depression. Well, I should have put a mic on, whatever. Pharmacological, just tell me if you can't hear me. Pharmacological, neural, and evolutionary perspectives. Okay, and so to start, often when I look at depression, I typically divide it into two components. First is as a sickness or as a natural disease, where essentially when we look at the level of physical illness reported in people with depression, we find that people with depression increasingly report sickness over time. For things such as digestive disorders, musculoskeletal disorders, circulatory disorders, and etc. Okay? Providing evidence that there's some sort of physical biology underlying depression that we could target. Likewise, as many of you guys know, I tend to apply something known as the comorbid theory of depression, which basically says that depression and depression biology is bidirectionally connected with a number of different pathophysiological disorders. For instance, people tend to say that anxiety and depression are related, and there's similar evidence for sleep, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, and etc. Well, as you guys know, I run a research group, and my students have impressively provided a lot of peer-reviewed support for this theory. Okay. I.e., targeting these physical components can have an effect on depression. Okay. All right, and so that's one way that I view depression as a sickness. The second way I view depression is as low adaptability or reduced flexibility. Where essentially, we see that when we look at people with low control and flexibility, we find that in people with low control and flexibility, in response to stress, tend to report higher levels of negative emotions. Okay? In turn, helping me build my model. Okay? Where essentially the goal of my seminar today will be to defend my model of depression from pharmacological, neural, and evolutionary perspectives. Okay? All right. And so what's the pharmacological evidence behind my model of depression? Well, when we look at our frontline therapies, i.e. SSRIs and SNRIs, we find that they're about 50% successful, which is okay, but we certainly want to do better. And essentially, when we look at what these drugs aim to do, we find that these drugs aim to artificially increase our mood and reduce our sadness through increasing serotonin and norepinephrine in the brain. However, as I've laid out, sadness isn't the same thing as depression. Thus, while these drugs are good, they fail to address some of the underlying foundations underlying depression. Where, interesting enough, when we combine SSRIs with exercise, we find an increased benefit. Where essentially, post-intervention of this combination therapy significantly reduces depression over time. Okay? Where, interesting enough, SSRIs alone seem to not have an effect. Okay? In line with this overall idea that exercise has overall beneficial effects on health. Thus, in this case, we would be directly targeting some of the foundations I propose are underlying depression. Okay. So moving on, another therapy we're increasingly considering for use in mental illness are GLP-1 agonists, or glucagon receptor agonists, which are well known for producing some significant effects on weight loss. Okay. And essentially, I don't know where this started, but there does seem to be a lot of hype and promise behind the role of these medications on mental health. As some of you may know, as I've shown some of you, I'm actually what you call a peer reviewer. That is, I assess and grade research articles before publication. And every week I get a new almost every week I get a new GLP-1 paper to assess. I.e., there's certainly a lot of research in this direction. But okay, coming back, what does the data tell us? Well, when we look at some of the data, it does appear that GLP-1s increase cognitive function over time, i.e. areas such as attention and memory, at least temporarily or transiently. This mic is, or this trackpad is okay. Okay, if we see the picture. But as I laid out, cognitive function isn't the same thing as adaptability, where when we look at areas such as, where when we look at executive function, which encompasses areas such as problem-solving skills and flexibility, we find that GLP-1s don't significantly perform better than placebo. I.e., there isn't a clear separation. And perhaps unsurprisingly, GLP-1s don't significantly reduce depression when compared to placebo. Hopefully providing further support for this idea that if we want to optimally treat depression, we really need to address some of these underlying foundations. And so in line with this, what are some therapies that I think are good at really addressing some of these foundations I propose are underlying depression? Well, when we look at some of the mouse data, we find that ketamine, which is subdivided into its forms of S-ketamine and R-ketamine, increases neuroplasticity through BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Where essentially, this growth in brain connections sounds like adaptation at the neural level. Where indeed, when we look at some of the data, we find that ketamine significantly reduces depression for up to a month. Likewise, ketamine reduces inflexible behavior. Likewise, another treatment that directly increases adaptive function is CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, where essentially these are anxious patients over time. Where essentially post-CBT, anxious patients display an increase in flexible behavior, back to control levels. And so just to give you guys an idea of the ideas and theories we're applying in the clinic today, what happens when we combine these two adaptation-promoting therapies in ketamine and CBT? Well, we find a long-term reduction in depression, where basically participants took ketamine within this time period and then underwent CBT for the remainder of the study, where it seems antidepressive effects were observed for up to 17 weeks or 4 to 5 months. Hopefully providing further support for this idea that targeting adaptation can produce optimal effects in depression. All right, and so one final therapy I'll mention that we're applying for depression today is psilocybin, which on its own does have some antidepressive and inflexibility reducing effects, where these are individual scores over time. And essentially, when we combine psilocybin with psychotherapy in the form of psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, another adaptation-promoting treatment, we likewise find a long-term reduction in depression for up to 180 days or 6 months. In my opinion, pretty striking. Hopefully, again, providing further support for my model of depression in the sense that when we aim to target these foundations of both sickness and adaptability, we will likely get better effects. Okay. All right. And so what's the neural evidence behind my model of depression? Well, when we look at the mouse brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, we find that the rodent prefrontal cortex is divided into the prelimbic cortex, or the PL, and the infralimbic cortex, or the IL, where essentially the prelimbic cortex is responsible for adaptive behavior. And so, how do we know this? Well, the researchers in the study performed the following experiment. basically they first put mice through avoidance training, where they had mice basically hear this tone, experience this shock, they paired this tone with this time-dependent shock, so that was their avoidance training. Then they put mice through reward training, where they associate this cue or this light with food. And then they put all the stimuli together and basically observed behavior. Okay? And essentially, the researchers found that animal behaviors or phenotypes were segregated across 3 different phenotypes. Basically, there was the avoidance-preferring mice who just stayed on the safe platform the whole time. Okay? There were the timer mice who basically went to get the food, but after a certain period of time, they went back to the safe platform, critically avoiding the shock. And then there were the approach-preferring mice who basically just stayed at the food area the whole time, despite getting shocked. Okay? Where essentially, it seems that these mice that are engaging in this timing behavior are engaging in some sort of adaptive function or strategic foraging. Okay? Let's visualize. Okay, and so these are the timer mice. And you'll see that both cues are on, the light and the tone, and these mice are currently foraging for food. However, after some time, they went to the safe platform, critically, before the shock appeared. Okay. These are the avoidance-preferring mice. So now the light and the tone are both on, and they're basically just staying at the safe platform the whole time. Okay. And the shock appeared, and they avoided it. And then these are the approach-preferring mice who are, they're just basically at the food area the whole time. Critically, they eventually get shocked, and you can see they ran away quickly after getting shocked. Anyone need to see that again? Yes, okay. But okay, is this moving? No. Okay. And so I hope that was somewhat interesting, but essentially, coming back, building off of this, when we look at the brains of these different mice, specifically when we look at the timer mice, we find that they express increased activity in the prelimbic cortex, as identified by CFOS data, or where basically CFOS is a marker for neuronal activity. Okay. I.e. supporting this idea that the prelimbic cortex facilitates adaptive function or strategic behavior. Okay. And so what happens when we inactivate this adaptability hub? Well, when we light and activate the prelimbic cortex using optogenetics, essentially we find an increase in avoidance behavior, i.e. fear and depression. Let's visualize. So basically you see the mouse with the wire in its head is the dominant mouse, and it's actually pushing out the subordinate mouse. Okay. However, now the PL will be inactivated, and there's a complete change in behavior. Okay. It's actually escaped out of this tube test format. Okay. Anyone need to see that again? Oh, that was clear. Okay. Okay, hopefully I've established that the PL is this area that facilitates adaptive function, and when it's turned off, animals express an increase in avoidance, fear, and depression. Okay, and so what happens when we additionally, what are some other phenotypes we find associated with this PL inactivation? Well, we find that when we chemogenetically inactivate the PL, so drug inactivate the PL, just a different method, but the same aim, we find that animals reduce their food intake, so they eat less. Where basically CNO is this drug, or the drug essentially facilitating this experiment. Okay? I.e., it seems that what comes with reduced adaptability is an increase in unhealthy behaviors, sickness, in line with my model of depression. Okay. Let me give one more example. Where, in addition, when we drug inactivate the PL, we find an increase in cardiac dysfunction. Where in this case, mice express an increase, or they essentially can't control their heart rate over time. Okay? Let me repeat that. So the first experiment showed that animals engaged in less food eating, which is unhealthy. And this experiment showed that when you inactivate the PL as well, you get a reduction in cardiac function. Okay? So you have cardiac dysfunction. Yeah. Bottom line, hopefully this is showing that there's some sort of link between adaptive function and sickness. When we reduce adaptability, there seems to be an increase in sickness behavior, in line with my model of depression. Okay? But okay, before I move on to some evolutionary evidence, interesting enough, it seems that adaptive behavior is sex-dependent. Where basically, as we've seen earlier, when we activate the prelimbic cortex in male animals, they express an increase in tube test pushing, as we saw earlier. Okay? However, interesting enough, the same effect isn't found in females, where when we activate the PL in female rodents, they don't express this increase in tube test pushing. Instead, what we find is that when we activate the PL in females, they express an increase in huddling behavior. Where basically here is what's circled is just these two mice together, and that's just a female getting closer to its male partner. Okay? Or again, indeed, when we activate the PL in females, they show partner preference, an increase in huddling. Okay? In turn, supporting this idea that it seems that evolved sex differences in adaptive behavior have emerged. For males, it seems that males have evolved territorial aggression, and females have evolved, and this is a term that they use in the field, but sexual receptivity. Okay? Or critically, in my view, it seems that females didn't evolve, females evolved a reduction in resilience, which will be critical to some of the translational data I'll mention later. Okay? All right, and so what's the evolutionary evidence behind my model of depression? Well, when we look at some of the global depression data, specifically comparing Africa to Europe, it does appear that there's more female depression the more north we go. And there's certainly more orange as we get into Africa. More interesting enough, when we look at male depression on its own, we see roughly similar levels, i.e., there's a lot of blue and then some orange, and then Europe, you have some blue and some orange. Or perhaps we could also include Russia into this picture. Okay? In my view, setting up this hypothesis suggesting that as modern humans evolved and moved out of Africa, it seems that males roughly kept the same levels of territorial behavior or aggression. However, females expressed a reduction in resilience. I.e., this seems like an extrapolation of the rodent foundations I mentioned earlier. Okay? So males express territorial defense, females express reduced resilience, and it seems like that has been exacerbated as humans evolved and moved north. More likewise, then, I guess indeed, when we look at the global health data, so including males and females in all countries, segregating males and females, but including all countries, we do indeed find that females have an increase in depression. Okay. Where this reduction in resilience or mental health susceptibility seems to extrapolate to other mental health traits. Okay. Likewise, one more thing, it seems that during stress or anxiety, males express an increase in cortical activity versus females that actually reduce that activity. Here's an example. So cortical activity during anxiety, males show increased activity and females show reduced. And this is a complementary figure. So increased male activity, critically for me in this ACC region, the anterior cingulate cortex, okay, which we've studied and we're about to submit a paper, but we'll figure that out. Okay, whatever. Nonetheless, hopefully further supporting this idea that it seems that during stress, males tend to express an increase in strategic behavior or reason, versus females that tend to show a reduction in resilience and emotional intelligence. Okay? Suffice to say, it seems that nature has provided us with biological or predisposed sex differences in mental health. Okay? And so, how has nature essentially counteracted this? Well, when we look at the global depression data, so in this case, including males and females, and specifically comparing Africa to Europe, it does appear that there's more depression the more north we go. Where likewise, when we look at some of the genetic data, we find that, or genetic data for ADHD, specifically when we compare Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, it appears natives in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe express a similar level of ADHD promoting genes. However, interestingly, as you go from Africa to Europe, it seems that there's an increase in ADHD protective genes. Okay? In my view, setting up this idea that it seems that overall, on the average, what has emerged in Africa and the Middle East is impulsive behavior versus Europe, where there's an increase in domestication and depression. Okay? In effect, helping me set up the following model. I.e., it seems that Europe is this hub for depressive behavior, and Africa and the Middle East are these hubs for impulsivity. Okay? And so I encourage you to think about, are there any specific cultures within these areas that seem to perhaps counteract some of these predisposed effects or behaviors? Perhaps selectively found in either region. Well, interesting enough, Europeans express high levels of Christianity, where when you look at the central rule book of Christianity, i.e. the Beatitudes, they're all about reducing depressive behavior, increasing happiness. I.e., interesting enough, this culture that's predisposed for depressive behavior, or these people who are predisposed for this depressive behavior, have adopted a culture that's antidepressive. In contrast, in Africa and the Middle East, there are relatively higher levels of both Judaism and Islam, where when we look at the Ten Commandments or the central rule book of Judaism, they're all about reducing impulsivity and aggression. Likewise, as advertised, Islam by its name means peace or subordination, reduce aggression. I.e., this seems like a clear case of what we call gene-culture coevolution. Nature has provided us with some specific genetic pathologies to which the cultures people have adopted counteract that. Okay? On one hand, hopefully providing further evidence for my model of depression in the sense that it seems that this hub of depression in Europe specifically underwent an adaptation for their depression. Okay? So what did Europe do to reduce their depression levels, their predisposed depression levels? Well, they adopted a culture or adapted their cultural behaviors. Okay? Likewise, perhaps this opens up the idea of evolutionary medicine, i.e. treating people based on their genes or ethnic origins, because nature has already done so. Or essentially, these are the levels of obesity in African Americans, where, as I've showed earlier, Africans have a higher predisposition for impulsive behavior. So basically, in my view, this just basically looks like a lot of impulsive eating. In contrast, personally, I find people of Somali descent impressively intelligent and possessing high levels of loyalty or teamwork, where basically this is the amount of fraud they committed in the last 7 years. I.e., it seems that they have high levels of deception and problem solving, i.e. really figuring out what works and running with it or expanding on it. I.e., if we want to create positive effects for both mental health as well as perhaps social change, perhaps we may need to look into some ethnic influences on behavior. Evolutionary medicine, or evolutionary psychology, that's another way to put it. Okay. All right, and so I'm almost done. I hope that was somewhat interesting, but I'll end my talk today with the following. Basically, often when I give depression talks, people tend to ask me the following question. Why is religion good for mental health? And essentially, I'll give you my two leading hypotheses as to why this might be the case, to which you could agree or disagree, and hopefully this will at least build some critical discussion. Okay? All right. And so my first hypothesis as to why religion may be beneficial for mental health is because of this idea of an evolutionary mismatch. Where, as I showed earlier, basically African Americans have high levels of obesity because of the high levels of food and food advertisement found in America. That is starkly different from their evolved context. Very different from their evolved context. Okay? I.e., an evolutionary mismatch is this idea that when you remove an organism out of its evolved context, issues are expected to occur. Likewise, a famous example of this would be the hygiene hypothesis, which basically says that humans co-evolved with bacteria. However, as humans started to move, or as when humans started to move into more cleaner environments, issues eventually occurred. In this case, autoimmune disorders. Or basically, these are the levels of autoimmune disease in Western countries, or Western or clean countries over time. Again, an evolutionary mismatch is this idea that when you remove an organism out of its evolved context, issues are expected to occur. And as I laid out, religion is this evolutionary construct. Thus, perhaps in theory, when you remove people out of religion, issues may occur. Where indeed we find that the more religious you are, the better your mental health appears to be. However, interestingly, when we look a little bit closer, it seems that religious behaviors aren't universally antidepressive. Where basically, they aren't ubiquitously antidepressive, that's what I've told people. Where basically, I guess in my view, very strikingly, we do find that the more you attend religious events or services in groups, so in this case church or similar events, the lower your depression is over time. I'll say it again, the more you attend religious services, which is the x-axis, the lower your depression becomes. Where basically high and low religiosity basically means the country you live in, but whether or not you live in a country that's highly religious or lowly religious. Okay? Where in both cases it does appear that this is antidepressive. However, interesting enough, individual prayer produces an increase in depression. Okay? So praying outside the church and individually on your own, is positively correlated with depression. In my view, setting up this idea that it seems that what explains or confounds this relationship between religion and positive mental health may be community. So confound just means it's the individual cause affecting this relationship. Where interesting enough, it seems that these religious groups undergo some sort of group rank effect. Where basically when we look at the closer your religious group is to the majority in the country you live in, which is a proxy for dominant status, the better your mental health is. Okay? Where essentially, I think this idea of group rank effects can go for so many different cultures that we observe today. Where some of you may know, I study hierarchical relationships in rodents, where basically dominant animals tend to express aggression, and subordinate animals tend to express anxiety or mental health symptoms. Where, interesting enough, essentially all three of these groups I put on the screen, BLM, feminism, LGBTQ, are well known for, when alone, highly predisposed for being bullied and having high levels of depression or mental health issues. However, once they have a reason and come together, they could become quite loud and dominant and aggressive. I.e., the stuff that we observe in rodents seems to indeed extrapolate to existing human cultures. In this case, this is an example of dominance. So as you get closer, or as you get higher in dominance, the more aggressive you become. In this case, the higher your group rank is, the better your mental health is. Where subordinates or lower ranking people have lower, or rodents have lower mental health or higher mental health problems. Similar here. Lower your rank, lower your mental health. Okay. All right. All right, and so I hope that was somewhat interesting. But essentially, that was my first hypothesis as to why religion may be beneficial for mental health, i.e., this idea of an evolutionary mismatch. My second hypothesis as to why religion may be beneficial for mental health is because perhaps it's what we call an antidepressive conglomeration, i.e., religions just find a way to bring a bunch of elements to itself that just so happen to be antidepressive. For instance, spirituality, which is found across virtually every religion, does reduce the risk of depression, okay? Where OR means odds ratio. Likewise, having a purpose in life, which is often given to us by religious contexts, does reduce the risk of depression. Okay? Likewise, childlessness, which is basically not having children, increases the risk of depression. Where so many successful religions I know actually promote the generation of biological offspring. Where basically this idea of an antidepressive adaptation can go for so many elements that we find across religions, such as meditation, yoga, and mate defense. It seems that religion's good at adding a bunch of elements to itself that just so happen to be antidepressive. And I'm happy to discuss these in more detail during the Q&A, like in terms of how does that relationship occur, how are they antidepressive. But okay, coming back, I hope that was somewhat interesting, but whether or not you are convinced by my first hypothesis, my second hypothesis, or something else, hopefully I've shown you today that religious behavior is ultimately an adaptation, and this is why they're antidepressive, in line with my model of depression. Okay? And so yeah, today hopefully I've defended my perspective or my model of depression from pharmacological, neural, and evolutionary perspectives. And if I didn't, I'm more than happy to discuss in the Q&A. Okay? And so yeah, that ends my presentation. I'm now open for questions. Whatever. Any questions? Hopefully I was kind of chill there, so it wasn't crazy. But yeah. Feel free to be direct. Like I was very direct in the presentation. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, we'll go with.
Do you have any research about the IL domain? I know you're talking a lot about the PL.
Wow, you know, I've been saying this to people. I shouldn't be talking about the things I want to do for my PhD in front of people. But in general, the IL is also known for maybe we'll cut this out. We'll figure it out. But ILs, so PL is adaptive behavior. So actually, as you get close, as you move up in your, sorry, I also treat this like a seminar. So I'm also teaching these guys how to think like scientists. But so as I've showed you guys before, I usually just modify the data to put my point across. So basically, the general idea is that the PL facilitates risk and reward, and that's the standard picture, and that sounds like adaptive function. So I just labeled it as adaptability. The IL is actually responsible for generally habitual behavior, so like learned behavior. So it could be. There is evidence that it promotes depression, but if that habitual behavior is positive, then it could actually be antidepressive. So it's Does that answer your question? So there's also literature that it facilitates habitual avoidance. I would assume that it's both directions because essentially how I look at there's actually another region involved with the cortex. It's the ACC, and essentially ACC, PL, and IL seem like all different areas for achieving adaptive function or some sort of cost-benefit analysis. So I would say the ACC facilitates what we call foraging, like finding food. PL facilitates something similar, risk and reward. IL is habitual. So these are all different forms of adaptive function. In terms of the IL and depression, there's definitely some areas where if you do knock it out, it increases depressive or avoidance behaviors. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if these habits formed by the IL, which might be more long-term, are antidepressive. Okay, that was kind of long. Please let me know if I don't answer your question directly. But yes.
I do have a few questions.
Of course, yeah, anything.
So for when you said the SSRIs have a 50% efficiency rate, is that within any stage of depression, or like does the rate of efficiency go down as like long as the depression is low?
Yeah, I'll kind of be honest with you. I always report these numbers at the start of my paper. Usually it's 30 to 50. I don't know where they got these numbers. To be honest, I think it's from the STAR-D study, and they say it's only about 30% successful or 50%.
I was thinking maybe like as depression installs into the person, then maybe they build some resistance to SSRIs, so that's why it might.
Oh, I see. Yeah. There's what do we call this? Yeah, the receptor decreases. It's like a homeostasis. Yeah, that's. I wouldn't be surprised, but to be honest, I'm not a fan of these drugs. I mean, I guess the first piece of data I showed was this is after 11 days. After 11 days, it doesn't work. In the far picture, and people usually say that if they do work, they'll work long term, which I actually don't understand that mechanism at all. I should maybe, but I'll tell you. Just I guess for me, in my view, what's the mechanism of action? What do they hope to do? In my view, targeting mood is not the way to increase depression, or it's not the underlying problem for depression. And I think
like the problem with SSRIs and depression is that they gain like the strength to act under depressive behavior.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
They're very prone to suicidality at the beginning of the treatment. So yeah, so I was wondering because then you talk about ketamine.
Yeah, sorry. Let me go to this. The question you should ask with people with depression is why are they depressed in the first place? Is increasing their mood going to help them deal with some sort of problem they face in life? I don't think so. Giving them strategies that they'll think of, we could talk about your question with ketamine, that will have an effect. That seems like you're actually targeting the underlying problem. Mood, in my opinion, is not the underlying problem, but it could be for some people. That's what I'll say. Okay. Sorry, that's your other question. Hopefully I answered that okay.
Yeah, so then ketamine is, again, is it in combination with SSRIs or is it alone? And would maybe also, is only ketamine working or would also propofol, for example, do GABA action, especially in combination with SSRIs?
Well, maybe I'll mention this. So the blue line, what happened here was they took ketamine and then they took normal, so treatment usual was SSRI. So then you can see it just goes back up. So for SSRIs and ketamine, I guess it's very transient. Yeah, that's what I'll say. But yeah, I mean, I guess the this is going against my pharmacology background and everything I've published in. But like honestly, but how is increasing GABA here? Okay, so overall for depression, I don't think these increasing mood or increasing sleep is generally going to be the problem solving or the solution. Though sleep could be a good solution because it also increases plasticity. Just keep that in mind. I guess as I was talking with her earlier, there's actually different subtypes of depression. So perhaps for insomnia related to depression, then a GABAergic drug would be helpful. Yeah.
Do you think that maybe, because ketamine also increases blood pressure a lot, so like if you increase sleep and you also give the patient ketamine, would they have like a higher blood pressure during their sleep, allowing them to have like more REM cycles?
I've never looked at this relationship between blood pressure and sleep. But in terms of this, my model of depression, I'll say if ketamine increases plasticity and sleep increases plasticity, then I would be in strong favor of this. I guess the other question is, because you brought up blood pressure, like, is it safe? You know what I mean? Like, this is obviously the big question when it comes to ketamine. Like, are we comfortable with giving this to people? But yeah, hopefully I answered your question. So, if your therapy aims to address these two paradigms, it seems like you try to increase sickness, or I mean, you increase blood pressure. That's increases sickness, so that's kind of counteractive. But in general, if your therapy aims to address these things, I think it's good. And so I also mentioned this is what I kind of tell people. Hopefully, this is a good takeaway for people who want to treat depression. Like personally, I think this is the way, basically. But yeah, so yeah. Next question, yeah.
I also have a couple more.
Of course. Sorry, did anyone else have any others? Yeah. You could be. Yeah, no questions. Okay. Did you have a question? Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, my eyes are kind of flickering, but what's up?
Because you had the maps of depression on Europe and Africa,
Yep.
and especially when you were comparing males and females,
Mm-hmm.
for
Oh,
like
interesting.
the rate was lower, right, than the female rate. But I know there's also this sociological concept, right? The feminist perspective. I know it's like more focused on the U.S. and pretty much it's a reason for why the population makes a prone environment for males to be more aggressive, and that's why most school shooters are male.
Interesting.
I think there's a similar thing, especially in Eastern Europe, where it's not necessarily that males are not depressed, they just don't want to get tested for.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, they act or they feel the physical getting. And I was wondering if there could be like a similar thing in Africa, and also like we should also account for how we test for depression, because especially in Eastern Europe, for example, there's not even that many functional MRIs, or like there's pretty different testing techniques, and how we look to actually have access to testing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me know if this is okay. In general, I think all of these, they don't use any biomarkers for depression. It's all scale and reports. Clinical, like, did a doctor say you have depression? Or did you report depression through the scales we apply with our team as well? I'll say that there's 3 sets of data, and maybe this is the way we could build this conversation. When we look at the global depression data, there's this data where it shows that clearly Europe is higher than Africa. There's data that shows that they're the same. And then there's data that shows it's actually higher in Africa than Europe. And I'll say, like, just think like a scientist. I don't know, I kind of encourage people to think like scientists. The 2 hypotheses are the following. Africans have lower susceptibility for depression. So basically, as humans evolved and moved out of Africa, they became more depressed. That's one hypothesis that I put forward. So this domestication hypothesis. And I'll say it supports like this case, as well as the case that they're equal. Like Africa and Europe have similar depression levels, in the sense that at the same time, maybe it's not highly reported, but I guess at the same time, there's better therapies in Europe. So if there's better therapies in Europe, why in the world are the depression levels the same, like in any data between Africa and Europe? So hopefully that made sense. Basically, they shouldn't be the same, but they are the same. And then there's a third set of data where it's, what did I say was the third set of data? It's higher in Africa than Europe. The reason for that could be, because there's better medicine in Europe. So that would be my first hypothesis. The second hypothesis would be, I guess, that they're the same. Essentially, using the data that we have available, does it make sense with all that data? I'll say my hypothesis that there's domestication supports all 3 types of data that we have available on global depression. I don't know about the other form, but yeah, is that okay? Okay. So the other thing to consider, just the bottom line, is Europe should have better treatment for depression. Therefore, they should have lower depression, but we don't ubiquitously find that. That's what I'll say. Okay. Sorry, in terms of these sociological constructs, I don't know. They're good. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer them. Definitely not my forte, but I think it's good. Hopefully, I build up a community or a laboratory that opens up these discussions. And yeah, hopefully, they're supported. That's what I'll say. So it's good. I'll try my best to answer them based on what I have. So, okay. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, no worries. Ask. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So on the GLP-1 RAs, I know there's a few recent studies that show a very like big relation between GLP-1 use and RAs use and osteoporosis, for example.
You saw the paper I was reviewing. I think I sent that to you guys to help out with, but sorry.
I know there's also like a recently published paper.
Oh, okay. It was on Science Direct. Okay, because I was probably the one who reviewed it. If you guys check, you double check. I don't know. If it's on Science Direct, check our group chat and see the papers I've sent to review. Like there was something like that as well. Then yeah. I have some insight there, but whatever. Yeah, what's your question? Sorry.
So do you think it like is maybe a vicious circle, because like it increases maybe the effects on like working on improving mental health, but at the same time it decreases like well-being and healthcare, the health
Sickness.
of the person in general. So like by having both of this,
yeah,
neutralizes
well,
like, the effect on depression.
Oh, you think that's the mechanism? Well, I guess overall, I don't think GLP-1s are good for depression in the first place. So I wouldn't even, to put it this way, entertain that question. Like if they're not effective, like we should move on. Sorry, just what comes to my mind is I'm pretty sure I know what that paper is. A lot of people, or I get the gist of the paper. Like a lot of papers will just be put there without the mechanism put out there. So, or unless this was like there was some basic science behind it. But so in terms of treating depression, I don't think GLP is not good for depression. So I don't think we should pursue this any further. But I guess your hypothetical idea was perhaps it does increase depression, but it reduces sickness. I would just not recommend that therapy. As I showed, there's a bunch of therapies available. So why are we going for something that's potentially like sick-inducing? That's what I'll say. And I don't know every case that produces like where sickness and depression are comorbid. Yeah, I just wouldn't recommend getting sick. Basically, that could be negative for your depression. Okay. Okay. All right. Go ahead. Yeah. What's up? That's all good. It's good. Questions are good. Shows the camera I know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean?
For the praying point.
Praying. Yeah.
What do you consider praying? Is it
That's a
like
fact.
in a group, or is it using prayers out loud? Because it might have a different effect on your.
Fantastic. You know, when I was giving this presentation, I don't know, there's this lady, I don't know if she watched the video, like she was very critical, like I think religion's going to have all these beneficial effects on mental health, but then like I just said this data out anyways. For this specifically, and maybe I can elucidate this further, and feel free, I'm happy to answer my question because I do think about these things over time. Like going individually and praying, like there's obviously different prayers per religion. So just going off and praying to God, I want to pass my test, or I hope this guy doesn't bully me today. Like these little prayers on yourself, like they're not good in the sense that it seems that people who engage in these frequent prayers are already highly stressed in the first place. So it's not really like there should be a better solution for them. On the other hand, like ritualistic prayers. So I used to hang around a lot of Muslim people, and they have these group prayers, and they're timed and very structured. I think those are good for depression because they essentially give what we call a meaning in life. So basically, a meaning in life is positive or a purpose in life, which includes a meaning in life, is positive for depression. And part of the questions that we ask people in terms of if they have a meaning in life is that they have some sort of structure. It seems that these group structured prayers and timed prayers are good for depression. But just, so I've heard Jordan Peterson say this. He's like, God is not a gumball machine. So I mean, just going off and asking for all these things, like very impulsively, that's not good for depression. So unorganized frequent prayers are not good for depression individually. Grouped, organized prayers are good. Okay, excellent. Anything else? Sorry, what? Why did it turn off? Oh, did it? Well, why is it showing? Sorry. My screen shows nothing. I don't know why.
I think it's
It passed 7, okay. They locked the door and stuff. But I mean, no, it's okay. Do anyone have any other questions? How controversial was that out of 10? I don't know. I like how I answered the questions directly, and hopefully they lead to good questions. But sorry, no other questions? Oh yes, we'll go Dingbo, yeah. What's up? Yeah, because I didn't fully elucidate it here. Maybe the easy answer is territoriality and aggression. By definition, sounds like you're fighting back against something. If you don't have that, it looks like you're just taking a bunch of like hits in life. You're not doing anything about it. So that, by definition, sounds like no resilience. That's yeah. Aggression on its own. So I have this figure here. Maybe I'll show you what I did for my Sip and Learn lecture. Like in my view, so I'll say this quickly. I'll show you what I ended off my Sip and Learn lecture with. Okay. No, I think I should go to the end. So basically, this is what I kind of showed them. Basically, I ended off was basically depression seems like a long-term form. Oh, sorry, and there's a lot of speculative stuff basically. So that's my perspective on it. It's a lot of intuitive ideas. But basically, a lot of people tend to say that depression is a long-term form of anxiety, and a lot of research, including some that we published, states that anxiety and aggression are opposing behaviors. In line with this, what do I think is the opposite of depression? I think it's resilience, i.e. a less intense and less emotional form of aggression, similar to how depression is a less intense form of anxiety. Basically, I see all these behaviors on opposite ends of this approach of avoidance balance. Any question? It's more of an intuitive thing for me, but, and frankly, this is what I do want to do for some graduate work, like resilience. Sorry, did you have any questions there? Like stress, resilience against stress. That's normally how they define it. Like, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what this was. Hopefully, I will. Oh, if you have to go, let me know. Yeah. What was it? I don't know. This how I was kind of training you guys again. Like what I'm used to. Oh no, not this. What I'm kind of trained to do is to look at some data and then put my human input on that data and think what it is. For both of these, I think what they did was that they conditioned people to associate some sort of picture with some negative idea. So they I guess I don't know exactly what it was, but it was a picture with a shock. So they made that, they conditioned like mice, fear conditioning, and then they underwent what's that called? Fear. No, what's after conditioning? Extinction. So they put that picture in safe environments, and then what's that called? Just let them condition out of it. And then later they exposed people to that picture again, and then recorded their brain activity, and then saw that males had a lot of resilience or cortical activity, and this is fMRI data, but then females had reduced activity. And then to me, that sounds like females are not really thinking critically when they're exposed to this previously associated negative stimulus. And then that leads to the idea that since cortical activity is associated with like higher level thinking, it seems that during stress or exposure to this formerly stressful stimulus, which I'm going to input or suggest is stressful, males are overall reasonable within this context. Perhaps engaging strategic behavior, in contrast to females who don't have this cortical activity, which I kind of just input, saying that they're less resilient, and cortical activity means less intelligence, so less. And we do see this with females in general, less emotional intelligence. Anything there? Yes. Christian, yeah. Christian was kind of like dominant religion back in Europe since a long time ago. Yeah, medieval times. This kind of dominant culture is like facilitating some certain genes as well, and like just like these two factors kind of like passive and accepted each other. And I just kind of wonder, to what extent do you feel like this also boosts like the awareness of depression or like the creation of the concept like in that area? And or would you say like people are for a while they were doing those antidepressant behaviors themselves, knowing the concept of like what depression? Well, that's interesting. I think even today people are engaging in religious behaviors without knowing that they're well, some of them do know that they're antidepressive, but here, let me know if I answer your question or not. But basically, so I guess the question was one of the questions was, do these people know that they're engaging in antidepressive behavior? Probably, but probably the other question is, do they know that they're more at risk for depression compared to Africans? In my view, I don't think so. So I think through internal. So this is just my ideas. I think through internal speculation, they might know that they have increased risk for depression, and that Christianity is good for depression. I don't think anyone. Well, I don't know. Maybe they have. They've thought about Christianity to this extent as I have. For background, I used to go to Muslim school in the hood, so I was kind of acquainted with a lot of Muslims. But I also went to a Catholic school for high school for a bit too, so I kind of see both worlds, and it's just very like it just kind of comes to me very clearly that yeah, just like all these Christian rituals, they're all about increasing happiness and singing and stuff. That part of it, all these rituals and singing and all that stuff, I don't think people recognize that that's good for depression. Also, in the sense that I don't think people have looked outside their religion that often. Bottom line is, I wouldn't be surprised if they recognize Christianity is good for religion. Oh yeah, I speak to people in depression in public like pretty often. And they always ask me, why is Christianity good for depression, which I said here. So I think people in general do recognize it, and I wouldn't be surprised if people, I don't know, in the 16th century also said the same thing. Sorry, what was the other questions? Yeah. Okay.
Europe's like antidepressant behaviors.
Mm.
Well, I think back in like when I look at the map and I think of like China, it's also interesting. I think that there's like Buddhism, as I learned.
Yeah.
There are also some concepts like maybe related to wisdom, sort of thing.
Sorry, what?
Just wisdom.
Wisdom. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Also, sometimes applied in psychotherapeutic like interventions.
Mm.
But I just back there, I feel like China was an area that might have really slow development of antidepressant behaviors. Like the concept of depression itself was also kind of like slowly developed.
Oh, okay. Like putting it out there, all that.
Yeah, just I know it's not like that relevant to today's topic. Just curious, can you say what it is?
No, I guess one thing is here's a general picture I tell people. I guess first, I don't know everything, but as you guys see through the papers I review, I could supervise everything. So if you guys want to look into this topic of gene culture co-evolution or religion and depression, like I've welcomed it all the time. As you guys know, I'm actually writing, I'm Filipino. We're writing a paper on it. Hopefully someone doesn't steal the idea, but is Filipino culture good for depression? Yes or no? So I welcome all topics. As I showed earlier, I'll just be mindful of your time, but China has. So as I showed earlier, I showed earlier in the last presentation, these are the statistics for Africa, Middle East, and Europe. What China looks like is that they have more blue and less red, so they're highly domesticated. I guess from there we would expect them to have religions. Wow, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's the reason in literature why they have that level is that in China there's high levels of farming, which I mentioned before, and these lower levels of hyperactivity facilitates farming behavior. So it reduces, like you can't like be very hyperactive slashing your rice paddies and stuff like that. It doesn't really work for farming. For religion, what type of religion would emerge in this context? Maybe put that idea to the side. This is something I didn't mention earlier, but this is why some people used to get mad at my theories, but I think it makes sense. So you can look at gene culture coevolution in two different ways. You can look at it this way through the spatial differences, but you can also look at it through time. Where basically, if as I mentioned, I've been through these traditions for some time, Christianity actually comes out of Judaism, if you know the story. There's this whole, you can check, his name's Steve Pinker. He had this idea saying that, are we getting better over time? Like, is aggression decreasing? And he's saying yes, we're no longer hunter-gatherers or these aggressive tribal people. We've become more domesticated. In general, Christianity within itself seems like an example of gene culture evolution, which I've told people. This was people started walking up and leaving the room when I showed that stuff, because I use, the picture of apes turning into humans. The ape side is more basal, and the human side is more today modern. I would put basal religions like older religions like Judaism on the left side, and Christianity like going in that direction. But you could also do this way. That's very controversial, but whatever. The idea is. When looking at a culture, because I know this in China, there used to be a lot of war, and then now it's a lot calmer. You could also perhaps see the trajectory of religions that occurred in the past to what's adopted to the future. So within an area, you could see what religion changed over time. I think when I presented this to one of my postdoc friends, because I was in Rome, Europe, like Italy used to adopt some what's that religion like all the Greek god religion where they had a god of war and all that stuff, and then now they've adopted Christianity, which is far more domesticated. So the theory I usually give to the team is humans underwent self-domestication over time, and behaviors have been aligned with this. So I'll say that idea of self-domestication can be used to understand what religions have appeared, and can be used as a lens to analyze in terms of what has happened in China. I encourage people to write a paper under me, and we can go from there. That sounds good? Okay. Yeah, what's up? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Bye, guys. No worries. Feel free to email me. What's up? Sorry, I honestly missed that. Yeah, I was saying bye to them. But. Mm-hmm. Oh, my theory on depression? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like after hearing this, I feel like I would probably memorize it as sort of like loneliness is a dangerous factor for
Yeah.
depression, but I feel like this might be like oversimplification and wondering how do you differentiate it.
No, I wouldn't deny it. I guess one thing people often say is, no, that's not the best one, but loneliness is a sickness as well. Like you get pretty sick through being lonely, therefore it's not adaptive and yeah, is depression promoting? I don't know. I guess we'll have to. I haven't looked at the statistics on loneliness and depression. I would assume, I guess when people say loneliness does predict depressive behavior. Oh, here's the other thing I often tell people else in a second. But yes, if depression is associated with loneliness, religion through community promotes that. The other idea, so if that's okay, the other idea is this idea of evolutionary mismatch, where basically people evolved in tribes, so they were always in groups. However, when humans started being more alone, this is not how we evolved, and then depression, like issues occur, in this case depression. So you can look at it through two lenses. Loneliness could be in its own not useful, so religion has adopted community to prevent that. Or the other idea is that loneliness is an evolutionary mismatch on its own, which I'm somewhat convinced by, but maybe we'll have to kind of look into things a little more deeper. That seem okay? You have any questions? We're at one. Oh, yeah. Any last questions? We're an hour in. It's okay. Let me know if you take your time, by the way, or we could cut it. This one?
Actually, one is like you summarize what behavior is to more or less depression.
This? Oh, this. Yeah. The depression. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Maybe I'll answer that. I'll be upfront. I'll be direct. These were, when you look at the European, so they basically take census data basically from Europe and Asia. When you look at Asia, these are the statistics. Like if you don't have kids and you're in Asia or Asian descent, it looks like you have higher depression. But in Europe, I think the numbers are very mixed. Sometimes it does promote depression. Other times it actually protects against depression. So it's very interesting. It's very context dependent. But to prove my point, as I've always been telling you, like the team here, and maybe you can watch the recording, like to prove a point, I've only put the statistics that I thought were important to push through my hypothesis. So I did put the statistics that are true, but just in Asia. That's what I'll say. Yeah. Anything there?
Yeah, no, it's just really making me thinking of like post-pattern depression.
That's certainly what a lot of people say is a different disorder. I haven't really looked at that very deeply. One of the very controversial evolutionary hypotheses is, but I would say it's true. Let's say, or it makes sense. Like, let's say a female undergoes postpartum depression. Like, that's basically testing if they have a partner that's able to take care of their child. if they don't, that kid will die. That's what happens in the basal environments. They undergo postpartum depression. They don't have a good partner. That kid is gone. But the other idea is, so that's what we call the ultimate theory when we talk about evolutionary psychology. The proximate theory is basically birth and all these things that are associated with birth are very stressful and they use up the body. So the females are very depressed after. I think that's the other hypothesis as to why postpartum depression occurs. So there's anything else? Yeah, it's good. Okay. I guess thank you everyone who stayed. I'm happy to answer any of the questions after. Yeah. Okay. Turn this off.